I'll call the September 18th meeting of the West Des Moines City Council to order and invite you all to stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, please sign in.
Five members present.
Okay, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Your Honor.
Hearing none, can I get somebody to move approval of the agenda as distributed?
As distributed?
So moved.
Moved and seconded, please vote.
5 yes.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 2, Citizens Forum. Anybody that would like to address the council on anything that is not either part of public hearings or new business, please come to the podium here, give us your name and address for the record. We'd ask you to keep it civil and respectful and under 5 minutes. Is there anybody here in the chamber that would like to address the council at Citizens Forum? Okay, seeing no movement, anybody online that would like to address the council for Citizens Forum, please hit *6, again, not #6, but *6 to unmute yourself. Is there anybody online that would like to address the council? Okay, hearing no one, Citizens Forum is closed. We're going to move on to item 3, Mayor, Council, Manager Report, other entities update, and we will start down to my right here with City Manager Tom Hadden.
No report, Your Honor.
All right. I would also note that we've got one of our Assistant City Attorneys, Jessica Grove, here with us. Welcome to the dais. And Councilman Hudson.
Nothing at this time, Your Honor.
Councilman McKinney.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Briefly, just a couple updates since we last met. First, relative to the Icon Water Trails, of course, City of West Des Moines is a participant of the Icon Water Trails. I want to let you know over the last several months, we have been working to find our next executive director. And I'm proud to say that we have an excellent new executive director, Stephanie Oppel. She's going to be starting very soon, and so we're excited to have her on board. I'll also say that I think it's important that folks understand exactly some of the things that Icon Water Trails are doing. It's not just about outdoor recreation. We had a board meeting this week where we learned about a lot of the cleanup operations that are underway. So when you think about water quality and some of the buffer strips and other activities that are being installed along some of these waterways, that's certainly something that's being done. But in addition to that, the report was just this last week that over 4,000 pounds of trash has been removed from various streams in the local area just this year. So a lot of good things happening at Icon Water Trails beyond just what everybody sees on the surface relative to outdoor recreation, which of course is important. In addition to that, we also had a development planning subcommittee meeting this morning where we continued to talk about, Councilwoman Hardman and I continued to talk about the super block, and there was I'll say a pretty robust discussion relative to a couple developments there in the super block, a single family neighborhood proposal, as well as some other future development. And so it was a good hour discussion relative to development, access roads, and other things, and it will be coming before the council here in the next month, I understand. So we worked through some stuff, but I anticipate we'll have further conversations as a full council relative to access to different properties along 88th Street and Boonville Road. So thank you.
So I just want to say thank you to you, Councilman, for diving in, feet first, head first, whatever you want to say. I appointed Councilman McKinney to the Icon Water Trails, and he delved in and is serving as co-chair of Icon Water Trails. And this is going to be huge for quality of life, for environmental cleanup and all kinds of things. So it's really exciting. I've seen some of the commercials out there in regards to Icon Water Trails, and I just think it's going to be huge for the future of not only our city, but for the region. And you have been a great leader there, and I appreciate you taking that head on and for all your leadership on the Icon Water Trails.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the appointment, and thank you for those kind words.
Absolutely. Okay, Councilwoman Hardman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to say that since our last meeting, I attended the West Des Moines Chamber Board meeting as a member, and as we all know, lots of exciting things are happening with regard to the chamber. I would like to put in a shameless plug for the breakfast that's on the 21st, which is the First Responders Breakfast, and it's the First Responders Appreciation Breakfast that will be happening at Des Moines Embassy Club West, and that's at 7:30. Love to see everybody out to say thank you for our first responders, and we know that we have lots of folks to show appreciation. So happy that the chamber takes the lead in putting that together, and pleased to support that. It was announced at the meeting that the board approved several months ago that the West Des Moines Chamber can have its very own foundation, and Catherine is extremely excited about that. The foundation will be used to support a lot of initiatives, quality of life initiatives, DEI initiatives. So I did accept an inaugural board position on that. I think you did as well, Councilman McKinney, but we are getting our first meeting set, first infrastructure set. So happy to serve as an inaugural board member of the West Des Moines Foundation that will serve to do great things in this community. So that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Trevilian.
Nothing this time, Your Honor.
Okay, Councilman Lotz.
Nothing to report, Your Honor.
Okay, and I would just report a couple things. One, I'll also give a plug for the chamber. October 14th is going to be the Raccoon River Rally. Put that on your calendars as well. It's always a fun time. I think Councilman Hudson last time with one of his children put together one of the cardboard
We have made a
boats.
more streamlined boat this year.
Oh, okay, he's made improvements on his cardboard
Now
boat.
it's going to be a rectangle. The rectangle was a disaster.
I think he took on a lot of water and sank last time. May have gotten the Titanic away.
Got home.
But anyway, big event, October 14th. And then I also want to say that I went to the DEI Workplace Awards. Councilwoman Hardman was there as well. It was a very heartwarming night. And our very own YJI won an award in the education area for what they do for at-risk youth and their study tables. They put on study tables and they feed the kids and educate the kids, and they really do a phenomenal job with our at-risk youth and helping them with grades and everything else. So it was, like I said, very emotional, very heartwarming night, and a lot of very deserving recipients of the awards that night. So, okay, with that, we're going to move on to item 4, consent agenda. Are there any items that anybody would like to have removed and voted on separately? We will pull the resolution for Latino Heritage Month proclamation, which is, what is that one? S. Yep, for S. Is there anything else that somebody would like to have pulled?
Let's see, it's item 4M1.
For M1, okay. For M1, any other items? Otherwise, I would take a motion to approve the remainder.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Please vote.
Five yes.
Okay, item 4M1, does somebody want to move that item?
So
It's
moved.
it's the Digital Enterprise Conduit Deployment, Segment 3, Phase 2. Okay, we've got a motion.
Second.
The second's been moved and seconded. Okay, any discussion? Okay, hearing none, please vote.
Four yes, one abstention due to potential conflict of interest.
Okay, we are going to move on then to item 4S, proclamation honoring Latino Heritage Month. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask for a motion and a second, and then I will read the proclamation and ask anybody that's here for this to come down and receive the proclamation and join us all in front for a picture. Okay, so
Second,
moved and
second.
Seconded. Okay, Whereas the City of West Des Moines proclaims Friday, September 15th through Sunday, October 15th, 2023 as Latino Heritage Month. And whereas the first observance began in 1968 as a week-long celebration that called upon all Americans to learn about the Latino experience and was expanded to a full month in 1988 by President Ronald Reagan. On September 15th, 16th, and 18th, many Latin American countries celebrate their Independence Day. And whereas this month provides us the opportunity to highlight the countless contributions of Latinos in West Des Moines. As the fastest-growing minoritized population in Iowa, Latinos help shape the social, cultural, and economic fabric of our state. They also account for 18% of the U.S. population, which equates to 60 million people. And whereas throughout West Des Moines history, the Latino community has played a significant role in the development of historic Valley Junction. Serving as rail and cement workers, they helped build the railroad and make the cement that would be used to pave roads and sidewalks, ultimately furthering the vision of historic Valley Junction. And now, therefore, I, Russ Trimble, Mayor of the City of West Des Moines, Iowa, and on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim September 15th through October 15th, 2023 as Latino Heritage Month. Together, let us commit to learning about the diverse experiences and contributions of Latino Americans. Signed this 18th day of September, 2023. And with that, are there any other comments? Otherwise, I would ask you to please vote.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you for the proclamation. Thank you, Audrey, for your work in that. Thank you, Mayor, for reading it. You know, this is really important, and it's important that we see folks like yourselves in the audience that we're honoring. And you are the fabric of West Des Moines. You're the fabric of this community. You're the fabric of the entire world, actually. And so all that you have done and all that your culture has experienced, what your culture has overcome, we appreciate you. We appreciate you very, very much. So this is a wonderful proclamation that honors the legacy and the culture of this community. So we appreciate you all being here.
I couldn't agree more. Very well said. Thank you so much. Okay, with that, please vote.
Who didn't vote?
We got to do it again. Didn't take.
5 yes.
Okay, and with that, if you guys would all please join me down here in front for a picture.
Can you take it, Audrey? Audrey, can you help with this?
Come on. So good to see you guys. Thank you for being here. All right, who wants to do another one? We get right in the middle.
I'm gonna squeeze it in. There we go. All right. We're getting to it.
I don't know.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. Good to see you. This is the first? Come on. Well, we'll have it every year.
Okay, yes.
Look forward to it every year.
That's why you have a diversity, equity, inclusion officer.
Okay, we're moving on to item 5, old business, item 5A, termination of EP True Parkway Urban Renewal Area, city initiated. We've got an ordinance for approval, the second reading, waiver the third reading, and adoption of final form. There are no changes from the previous reading, which was adopted unanimously with Trevelyan absent.
Move consideration of the second reading.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, please vote.
5 yes, an ordinance repealing ordinance number 2259, providing for the division of taxes levied on taxable property in the EP True Parkway Urban Renewal Area in the city of West Des Moines, Iowa, pursuant to section 40319 of the Code of Iowa.
Move approval of the second reading.
Please vote.
5 yes.
Move to waive the third reading and adopt in final form.
Second.
Please vote.
5 yes.
Okay, item 5, oh, I'm sorry, going the wrong way here. Item 5B, termination of Grand Ridge Urban Renewal Area, city initiated. We've again got an ordinance for approval of the second reading, waiver the third reading, adoption of final form. There are no changes from the previous reading, which was adopted unanimously with Trevelyan absent.
Motion to consider the second reading?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, please vote.
5 yes, an ordinance repealing ordinance number 2329, providing for the division of taxes levied on taxable property in the Grand Ridge Urban Renewal Area in the city of West Des Moines, Iowa, pursuant to section 40319 of the Code of Iowa.
Motion to approve the second reading?
Second.
Okay, please vote.
5 yes.
Motion to waive that third reading and adopt in final form?
Second.
Please vote.
5 yes.
Okay, item 5C, we've got a resolution regarding the final design, site selection, and consideration of acquiring agricultural property, Mill Civic Parkway, Sugar Creek, and Fox Creek Crossings. If you remember, at the last meeting, we had a public hearing. The public hearing was open and closed. We received comment from the public, including Mr. David Brown of 33,425 Waterbury Circle, and he was concerned about the impact on his property. We deferred on this item and asked staff to get together with Mr. Brown to have a conversation, and as the Pinky specifies, the resident who had the concerns does not actually have affected property. It's actually the homeowners association property, I believe, that's affected rather than his property. But as a courtesy, the notice went out in a very broad fashion to let everybody know what was going on. So I believe Mr. Brown's concerns have been addressed, and I don't believe that he's here today. I don't see him here today. But with that, we have got a resolution, as I said, to approve the final design, site selection, and consideration of acquiring ag property.
Motion to approve the resolution.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
I'll just say, thank you, Mayor. I just want to say thank you, Brian, and your team for taking the time to have the conversation. I know that the delay was not ideal, but I appreciate the effort that went into it, and to my colleagues up here for, supporting that approach. So thank you. I think it all worked out.
I would agree.
Agreed.
We were really getting after Brian at that meeting, and it was his 50th birthday that night. So he took a beating, and then he went to celebrate, hopefully.
Happy birthday, Brian.
Yeah.
This is on the record. It was his 40th birthday. It was on the record.
30th birthday.
Right?
40 plus 10. He's still young. All right. Had we known it was his 50th birthday, we would have done something really fun, but we didn't know at the time.
We just put him through pain.
Yeah, you just,
All right. Any other discussion on this? Okay, hearing none, please vote.
5 yes.
Brian, you look 40 to me. Okay, item 6,
70.
public hearings. Item 6A. This is a time and a place for a public hearing to consider Holiday Park Phase 8 parking lot and entry improvements. We've got 2 resolutions and a motion we can take at the same time. I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself.
Got to do the public hearing first.
I'm sorry. Brian, would you please read the date the notice is published?
September 1st, 2023, in the Des Moines Register.
And have there been any written comments to this hearing?
None, Your Honor.
Okay, and this is initiated by the city. With that, anybody that'd like to address the council on item 6A, please come to the podium, give us your name and address for the record. Anybody online, hit star 6 to unmute yourself, and do the same thing. Is there anybody that would like to address the council on item 6A? Okay, hearing and seeing no one, I will declare the public hearing closed. Again, we've got two resolutions and a motion, which we can take at the same time. And this did come through the Public Services City Council Subcommittee with unanimous recommendation. Somebody want to make a motion?
So moved.
Approve.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, please vote.
5 yes.
Sorry, I'm in rare form getting ahead of myself tonight. Okay, item 7, new business. Item 7A, Mill Ridge, Plat 6, northwest corner of Stagecoach Drive and South 88th Street, accept public improvements and approve final plat to create 60 footprint lots for medium-density residential development, 2 outlots and 1 street lot, Mill Ridge Homes LLC. We've got a resolution to accept the public improvements and approve and release the final plat, and there are no outstanding issues.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Is there anybody from the audience that would like to address the council on item 7A? Or anybody online? Okay, any discussion from the council? Okay, hearing none, please vote.
5 yes.
Okay, item 7B, replat of Hillside Subdivisions Lot 1 and 2, 3078 and 3080 120th Street, Van Meter. Approve replat of final plat to adjust common boundary line, Madison County Zoning Administrator Ryan Hobart. We've got a resolution for approval and release of the replat of Hillside Subdivision. Final plat, there are no outstanding issues, and the applicant is in agreement with all staff recommendations.
Motion to approve.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Is there anybody from the audience or online that would like to address council on item 7B? Okay, seeing and hearing no one, any discussion at the dais? Okay, please vote.
5 yes.
Okay, item 7C, picket fences, Fence Communities 2023, northeast corner of South 88th Street and Mill Civic Parkway. Approve a preliminary plat to create 1 lot for multifamily residential and 7 lots for single-family residential, and approve a site plan to allow construction of 236 multifamily dwellings, PFC WDM LLC. We have a resolution for approval of the preliminary plat and site plan. There are no outstanding issues, and this was approved by both Development and Planning and Zoning unanimously. Can I get a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, so moved and seconded. Anybody from the audience or online that would like to address the council on item 7C? Okay, hearing no one, any discussion on the dais?
Just for the picket fence community project, we've discussed it before here on the dais, and I know we've had folks from the area in there before, but just to confirm, we have future traffic controls that are a part of this, a future 4-way stop. We have extra buffering. I know that the folks who are doing this development have worked with us to create extra buffering, including a fence, including extra trees and shrubs and bushes and whatnot, foliage, to make sure that that buffer is a really, really good buffer. Furthermore, the developers have also placed the lowest density units on the north side along Coach Light there. So just wanted to share once again to everyone who's maybe listening online too, that the city has worked with the developer to ensure that the most balanced approach has been taken with regard to this picket fence community. So just wanted to throw that out one more time.
Very good point. Thank you for acknowledging that. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, please vote.
5 yes.
Okay, item 7D, Bridge Lot, northwest corner of South 19th Street and Fuller Road, approved preliminary plat to allow subdivision of 2 lots for development, 2 outlots for Jordan Creek, and 1 street lot, and approve the Bridge Lot townhomes phase site plan for footings, foundations, and private utilities for 1 4-unit townhome building, Walnut Creek Community Church. We have got a resolution for approval of the preliminary plat and phase site plan. There are no outstanding issues, and the applicant is in agreement with all staff recommendations. This was also approved unanimously by Planning and Zoning. Somebody want to move approval of the resolution?
So moved.
Second.
So moved and seconded. Anybody in the chamber want to address the council on item 7D, or anybody online, hit star 6 to unmute yourself. Okay, hearing and seeing no one. Any discussion at all on the dais? Okay, please vote.
Five yes.
Okay, item 7E, plat of survey, parcel 23-5, southeast corner of Mill Civic Parkway and South Grand Prairie Parkway. Approved plat of survey to create a 48.29 acre parcel for tax purposes. West Des Moines Ground LLC. We've got a resolution for approval and release of the plat of survey. There are no outstanding issues, and the applicant is in agreement with all staff recommendations. Is there anybody, I'm sorry, can I take a motion to approve the resolution?
Motion to approve.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Anybody in the chambers or online that would like to address the council on item 7E? Okay, seeing no movement and hearing no one. Any discussion?
Yeah, Mayor, I'll just say, similar to the comments, Councilman Hudson, that you made on the last item, I think, the developer here has continued to work closely with the housing development that's just to the southeast of this, in a way that I think keeps everybody in line, or I shouldn't say in line, but up to speed as to what's going on there. And I know Councilman Lotz and I spent some time out there last spring talking with the residents, and I've continued to hear positive things about ongoing dialogue. So I want to point that out, because this is an important area, important corner, and there's also a pretty large housing development right there.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other discussion? Okay, please vote.
Five yes.
Okay, item 7F. We've got a resolution to authorize demolition of the vacant house at 329 6th Street. There are no outstanding issues, and this was supported unanimously by the Finance and Administration City Subcommittee. If you look through the pinky, we were doing everything we could to try to save this house, to try to move this house. Staff has gone out and talked to different nonprofit housing developers like Habitat for Humanity and others, and really only one person has come forward at this point, and it was basically somebody interested in trying to save the garage. Nobody has been interested in the house to this point, and so we've got this resolution before us to unfortunately demo the house, but we've done everything we could to try to move it and save it, and there's just no takers. Does somebody want to move approval of?
Move approval.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Does anybody in the council chamber or online want to address the council on item 7F? If so, please come up to the podium, give us your name and address for the record. Keep it civil and respectful, and 5 minutes or under. Anybody online, hit star 6 to unmute yourself. MJ.
Hello, MJ Hoag, 413 2nd Street.
Okay.
Looking at that pinky, man, staff tried real hard, and I appreciate how hard they tried for that.
Thank you.
But so, what are we talking about here? We're talking about spending money on demolition so we can spend money building a parking lot, which obligates us to spend money on maintenance every year for a parking lot, which I remind you, the city's own parking study said we don't need. So to use some numbers from the last time this came up when the house got bought, the estimate is about $700,000 total spend for about 48 spaces, which works out roughly to $14,500 per space, which is over 22 years of my tax dollars for that one space, that doesn't seem like a particularly great use of tax dollars. So I thought, well, we want to be good stewards of the tax dollars. Are there cheaper options? Like, let's say that parking study is wrong, right? Maybe there are cheaper options that provide additional parking. So I looked around. 4th Street is 30 feet wide. That's wide enough you could park a semi on one side of the street, a semi on the other side of the street, and still have enough room to drive our ladder truck down through the middle, right? So 4th Street is definitely wide enough to add on-street parking, which it currently doesn't. The east side of the 300 block on 4th Street would add 14 to 15 spaces by itself, and that's basically free. You take down the no parking signs. Walnut between 6th and 7th, so north side of the 300 block, you move the parking to the other side of the street because there are fewer curb cuts and such. That adds an additional 4 parking spaces. Again, basically free. And you can find places around in the neighborhood where you can just move parking around and get additional parking spaces. And actually moving parking to the other side of the street creates a chicane, forcing drivers to slow down, pay a little more attention, also making it safer for pedestrians. Or you could also get really fancy and convert to like yield flow streets, which is parking on both sides, and then people have to take turns. But we're Americans and we hate taking turns. You can also, in addition to ways that increase the amount of available parking around there that's basically free, you can reduce demand, right? Parking obeys the same basic economic principles that anything else does, right? You walk down the street, somebody offers you a free hamburger. You're like, heck yeah, free hamburger. Somebody says, hamburger's only $1. You might be like, yeah, I'm not that hungry, right? Parking is the same way. You charge for parking, and someone might be like, you know what? I don't mind walking an extra block. I'll park on the street. So you can also use that revenue and establish what's known as a parking benefits district, where the money for parking goes to improvement projects, murals and other things. So people are at least like, yeah, it sucks that I got to pay for parking, but at least it's going to something nice. So I don't think it's being a good steward of our tax dollars, spending money to spend money so you have to spend money when you can do things that are basically free, that increase the parking supply. You can do things that are revenue neutral at the very least, that increase or that reduce demand. And it's totally okay to, you could sell the house. City would probably make money given the current housing market. You could also keep the house, let Human Services or some other nonprofit rent it out to a low-income family. And then you always have the option in the future, if you're like, okay, we've exhausted all other options, we still want to pave paradise and put a parking lot, you totally can. But yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, MJ. Always appreciate how thorough you are and all of the different alternatives that you take a look at and all the suggestions that you provide. We've got some pretty unbelievable traffic engineers that take a look at a lot of things when they decide where the parking is and where the parking isn't. And I think they've taken a look at a lot of those things, and the parking is on one side of the street, not the other, for various reasons. Could be mailboxes, could be a number of driveways, could be that the street's not wide enough. Are there other options out there? Maybe there are some other options out there, but, and then to address the comment on parking. I mean, you remember the heated discussions on parking and the whole Valley Junction Committee and all of the discussion that went on there. And I remember specifically a whole lot of people, I want to say 20, 30 people, that were arguing we do not have enough parking down in Valley Junction, and that bothered them. We did some parking studies. The parking study showed that, the parking was sufficient at that time. But a lot of things have happened in Valley Junction since that time, and Valley Junction is going gangbusters. We've got a lot of new business development going on down there, a lot of new restaurants and small businesses are popping up. We've got more development that's going to go on. And this, I think, was in the plans and in the works for the city for, I don't know, probably at least 5 to 10 years. So I think the extra parking is probably necessary, and in the future, I think it's going to be even more necessary than it is now. So I don't agree with you, this is a bad use of taxpayer dollars. I think this is a good use of taxpayer dollars. I wish we could have saved the home and had another home down there, but we did everything we could. So I guess I would just beg to differ with you on use of taxpayer dollars here. I think this is going to be a good addition to Valley Junction, more parking. I've been down there before where I've had to park, it felt like about a mile away on a Thursday to go enjoy the farmer's market and music in the Junction, and I think this will be a nice addition. But again, wish we could have saved the house, so.
Mr. Mayor, to be clear about the vote tonight, the vote is not to construct a parking lot whatsoever.
No,
This is specifically for the demolition, and so I don't know when that parking lot will come down the road, but I'm sure there'll be more conversations between now and then. But for tonight, the parking lot is not on the docket. So we're not actually voting on that.
it's voting to demolition the house, correct.
Well, thank you for your time.
I have questions about the garage. So we are voting to demolition the home. The garage is separate, and someone has until the 29th to move it, and if they don't move it, what are we doing with the garage?
Then it's going to be demoed.
Okay, but that's not part of the vote tonight.
So the vote tonight is to demo the
House.
house and save the garage, I believe, for the individual that has come forward and said that they would like the
Yes.
garage, but they have till this time certain to come and have it moved. Otherwise, it will be demoed as well.
Yes, and that's not going to come back before the city council. That's the agreement that was made between
Okay.
the person who decided to bid on moving the garage.
And does Mr. Hahn know that September 29th is
Yes.
the trigger date?
Yes.
Okay. Is there interest to continue to move the garage, or do you know?
I haven't been in conversations with him.
We're working a application for the permit through the process. It's scheduled for this Saturday
Okay.
to move.
So, given the fact that we are not making plans to build a parking lot in the immediate future, we don't even have CIP funding for this, why the urgency to bulldoze this house? It's a perfectly good house. It was lived in until such time as we bought it. So why not, to MJ's point, because this is exactly what I had thought of when I first read through this, was that why not rent it? We rent commercial property down in Valley Junction, the small shop there adjacent to and part of the Valley Junction Activity Center. Why not rent this property until such time as we're going to build a parking lot? That gives us more time to find somebody that wants to move a perfectly good house. So I'm not saying staff didn't try. I'm just not sure we tried hard enough. Again, what's the urgency? We've got two houses at 12th and Locust that are the biggest piece of crap I've ever seen that the city bought and should never have bought, and they're still standing. Why the urgency on this one?
Are they vacant?
Yeah, they're vacant. They've been vacant before we bought them.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Ryan Moffett, Community and Economic Development Director. This is obviously a problem that I inherited coming into the job. I wasn't around when the city opted to purchase the house and some of the history behind this. But I guess to answer the question specifically about the parking lot itself, I think when I've talked with the city engineer on this, it's our intent to make a budget request for this next coming fiscal year. We don't know if that's going to rise to the priority level to where it would be funded or not, but that's kind of our thought in terms of when that request would come forward at least. Regarding why we are making the recommendation to take this down, at this point in time, it's basically just to make sure that the property doesn't deteriorate, that it doesn't become a maintenance liability. The houses at 12th and Locust, for example, they've been broken into before. We've had to go back and secure those properties. So to my knowledge, we haven't had that happen at this particular address yet, but we want to make sure that that doesn't become a problem longer term.
So why not bulldoze the two at 12th and Locust and the one at 8th and Vine that we bought that we should never have bought? given
So-
the situation. Why are we going after this one, which is a move-in ready house? I gotta believe there's somebody out there that would rent it, even if you write the lease, a 1-year lease, or at the time that the parking lot's gonna be developed, whichever comes first. There's ways, am I not right, Jessica? There's ways of writing that lease that way?
There is if you have an interested person who wants to lease it, but as.
You
the only
don't know
legal-
until you
the-
ask.
The legal concern would be the liability of holding onto the property. And I don't want to speak for Ryan, but I believe something will be coming forward to council soon for the 12th and Locust properties.
Yeah,
When we
we'll have
met
an
at- oh, go ahead, Ryan.
RFP in front of council in October, basically, for the 12th and Locust sites, which what we're looking to do there is whoever ends up with the RFP, basically, the city wouldn't be doing the demo contract on those properties. That would be basically a grant that the city would provide to offset the cost of demo once the properties are redeveloped. But we won't be doing the demolition ourselves on that
But
one.
you're still paying for it.
And I do want to make a distinction between the rental acquisition program and this property, which are not really tied together. We did explore whether or not we could move this house to the sites at 12th and Locust. Again, we reached back out to some of the nonprofit housing developers that we originally engaged. Just didn't have the interest there, and that was after we sweetened the pot a little bit for them.
So why don't we move this house to 12th and Locust and make it a viable house?
Well, that's one of the items that we looked at was to get a cost estimate for what a move would look like, to just basically take this and put it on a foundation, pay for the move. Nonprofit housing developer would still rehab the property. That estimate came back around $75,000. We presented that to FNA, and at the time, they made the recommendation to go down this route instead of move it ourselves.
So to address that specifically, actually, Renee, would you like to go? I will
Well, it's
gladly
good-
defer to you.
Yeah,
for
Yeah,
a
it's
moment.
good to understand what it costs to move, which is significantly more than the 31 to 34. You're saying close to about 70 to 75,000.
That was the estimate that we
Okay,
got back,
that was an
yes.
estimate then. So was it seems like there was some effort made to try to let the public know this house was available. They said there were signs placed in the yard, and the bid offering was published in the paper. So there was some efforts made to
And
let
then a
the
word of
public
mouth
know.
campaign in Valley Junction as well.
Yeah, that it was available, okay. I just wanted to, and that's been going on for several months now?
Yeah, originally, we started out with the nonprofit housing developers in
Yeah.
March, and then in June is when we did the public notice and the outreach with the sign in the yard and the, letting the foundation know in the surrounding
Yeah.
area that the property was going to be put up for a public hearing.
And neither one of the nonprofit organizations had any interest, is that correct?
Yeah, we interviewed 3 different nonprofits, and then basically, we were going to send this to council in the meeting following FNA subcommittee, where they voted to advance this, but we slowed down a little bit, reached back out to the nonprofit housing developers at that time. After we kind of, sweetened the pot a little bit with the incentives to relocate the house at the city's expense, we still didn't get any interest from those partners.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
when this came before our Finance Administration Subcommittee meeting, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, the nonprofits, they were much more interested in the 12th and Locust Street versus this one, correct?
Correct.
And that's why those things are going to be moving forward in the coming months. And what you said earlier, we've been talking about this for a year now, but as you said, we slowed it down to really ensure that everyone knew, as many people knew as possible, that these were options. When we met with the nonprofits, including Habitat for Humanity, they did, well, I don't know the type of analysis that they do, but I imagine they're very good at what they do, and they came to the determination that this one on 6th Street is not going to be within their wheelhouse of what they need to do. And so because the deal couldn't be struck there, none of the other nonprofits were interested in it. That is why the 12th and Locust, that's coming up, but that's why this specific one, there was just no interest in any way, shape, or form. Am I?
Not from the nonprofit housing
Not for the
developers, no.
nonprofits, yeah. And certainly it's been for sale before, and still no takers in that particular regard, too.
Well, yeah, there was a bid. It wasn't
Yeah.
listed for sale per se, but there was a bid to get, garner interest in the property to see
Sure.
if someone would want to relocate it.
More specifically, yes. So,
I'll have one comment, and it's more of a philosophical one for you, Ryan, in the future. Like, as a council member, and I'm only one of 5 voices here, I'm not really that interested in the city becoming a landlord. I think it's beyond the scope of our responsibility. I also think that there's been a lot of signaling from the legislature recently, right or wrong, about what is the scope of our role in our municipalities and can we shrink that footprint. So some may agree or disagree with that signaling, but I just don't see a reason why we should be getting into landlord business.
Yeah, and that's a relatively new idea. So, I mean, we haven't had time to really vet what that looks like. We don't know what it would take to make the house livable, to meet rental code, if there's lead paint remediation that needs to happen, if there's operable appliances or a water heater that works. So we would need to look at those kind of things. And I think my recommendation to the council would still be the same, and that if the project for the parking lot is funded next year, there would be more expense to get the house livable for a short span of time before a parking lot would be built there.
Councilman Loach, to be specific on what you just mentioned, you're not referring to the acquisition of property for a purpose, you're referring to the acquisition of property, the holding of it, and then the rental of said property as a landlord.
Correct.
Okay, just one.
Well, and I worry too about the liability that Jessica brought up. I mean, you know, the money that we're going to get in rent and the liability that we're going to have, I mean, again, we're not a landlord, and we could have something happen there, and now we're sued for, you know, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars for something that went wrong in this property that, you know,
Honestly,
I'm
we
sure
would
it's
need to
worth it.
engage a property manager. We just probably don't have the in-house expertise
Right.
based on my conversation with some of the staff today to do this on our own.
right,
In terms
no,
of
I don't
rental.
disagree at all. Councilman Lutz, you're going to say something else?
And then you pay a fee for property manager, right?
I would think that that would be a charge, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have
Do it
anything
for
else,
free.
Your Honor.
Okay. All right, any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, please vote.
And this is to demolition the home.
This is to demolish the home.
Okay.
3 yes, 2 no.
Okay, that item is approved. Item 8, receive, file, and/or refer. We have no items to receive, file, or refer. Item 9, other matters. Are there any other matters that any council person would like to raise at this time? Okay, hearing none, we're going to, where are we going to have our workshop? Are we going to stay in the council? Okay, hearing none, we're going to adjourn into our workshop. Fall off at some point.
Russ, I got a steel hammer at home. I'll bring you next week with a steel plate. That'll.
Can you get one with like a sledgehammer?
Yeah, exactly. 3-pound sledge. Absolutely. That's what. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
It's loud.
All right. Why don't we take 3 minutes, and then at 6:20,
Yeah.
we will go into our workshop here.
I just think it's stupid.
6 of one, half dozen the other, right?
Yeah. I just don't know what else we can do. Become a landlord.
going? Are we staying there?
Where did you guys get your snacks that you guys are just got? Where are the snacks at?
Probably back in the,
I'm gonna go get some more. Do you want
Okay, I'm gonna, yeah, I don't know what they have. I'll go
We'll
with you.
come back with us.
Okay.
all right, 3 minutes.
We need some snacks.
Yes, ma'am. So will you tell me what you like to go by? That's good, Jesse.
I told you, as long as it's
You're-
not derogatory.
Your Highness.
You're
Yeah,
right.
yeah, exactly.
That's what Nate calls her.
Boss. Yes, ma'am.
I do get a lot of what I want.
Yes, dear. Whatever you want, dear.
I'll get my point and then-
Smart man. He's learned. It's only been a few years of marriage, but he's learned.
He's one married lawyer.
I mean, we decided to build a house only like a year ago. Not, I do not
Oh,
recommend.
that's what they say on the books when we build our house. Say, make sure your marriage is solid before you build that house. I'm like, come on.
Now, are we?
Oh, right, right. Next to it. We had as a. It was a jewelry shop for a while. We just redo the lease, or we put it up for our lease. For our lease, that office space. That's the only place we have one. Okay, I'm not talking about mine. This was a short hotel. You got more time. We have a little place in town. But let's charge him $5,000. Where's the sign tomorrow? I vote for him. All right. We have got a workshop on zoning ordinance down in the historic West Des Moines area.
And we'll be done in,
Everywhere.
we'll be done at 6:30, is that all right?
Well, sorry, everywhere. I thought,
we were doing Clive tonight.
we're doing Clive tonight? That's another night.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I thought it was just for historic West Des Moines, but I guess it's everywhere.
Right, I just
Okay,
wanted, it's
everyone.
all over the city.
Okay. All right. Who wants to start us off, Linda? All right. Come on up.
Hello, Brian Ports with Development Services. And as you're aware, we are looking at updating our zoning code, doing a complete overhaul of it. And that's because of the comprehensive plan that was approved last fall. That this, our current zoning code doesn't really mesh with that. So we have a consultant that's looking at that for us. It's Multi-Studio out of Kansas City. And Graham Smith and Chris Brewster are here to kind of go over where they are and kind of get some input from you and just make sure we're on the right track for this. So, Graham, take it away.
Thank you. Just the keyboard to advance.
Yeah, if you want to, either the arrow or space bar to.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, council. Graham Smith with Multi-Studio. As Brian said, we're your zoning consultants, and 8 minutes or 7 minutes now might be a little tight to get through this, but we'll give it a shot. I know. So what we thought we'd do tonight is we did want to give you kind of an update of where we're at, what we're working on. It's not advancing. Give you an update of where we're at, what we've been working on over these last few months, and kind of where we're at now and some of the critical kind of input that we need from you all in terms of continuing to move forward. We wanted to back up a little bit and start with kind of our overall approach, tying your plan to your new code. And what are the critical pieces of that? What are the critical tools that you guys have at your disposal to help implement, to create the zoning ordinance, but also implement your zoning ordinance, and more importantly, implement your plan over the next several years? One of the things we've been working on over the last few months is what we're calling the pattern book. One of the things that we noticed in looking at your plan and your current code and some of the other work that you've done is not necessarily a lack of attention to the public space design, but really not going deep enough. And so we wanted to take your plan and some of the elements that are in there, and then looking at some of the things that are already in your code and in your subdivision regulations, and make sure that we made a clean connection between those two pieces. And that's really the intent of the pattern book. And then finally, we're going to dive into actually talking about some of the zoning that we're looking at, starting to look at, and how we move those pieces forward. And that's really where we need to have a discussion with you all and also get some feedback from you. And we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So as you probably all know, some of the tools that you guys have at your disposal to plan for the future of your community really starts with your comprehensive plan. And as Brian said, you adopted a new comprehensive plan almost a year ago. And that really set the stage for what you all want to be in terms of physical development in the future. How you want to grow, how you want to redevelop, where you want to invest public dollars into your community to grow to that vision that the community decided you all wanted to be. what the plan does for us in terms of rewriting the zoning ordinance is really sets that broad kind of framework and broad community context in which we expect development to happen. So we want residential land uses here, we want commercial land uses here, we want a mix of those things in these areas. So that really kind of provides that broad framework of context in terms of future development and redevelopment. The other thing, and you have a new plan, I forgot the slide was in here, and one of the things that's great about your plan is it goes through some very specific elements, including community design, housing and neighborhoods, sustainability, economic prosperity and land use. And what is really beneficial about your plan is it not only stops at land use, but it dives into place types and really how that land use should be implemented. And that's where we want to talk about the pattern book and the public spaces and how that relates. So the next tool is really something that is really focused on the public spaces, which, as I said, we've been focused on over the last several months. And those are the subdivision regulations. Within your current code now, I believe it's Title 10, are your subdivision regulations that really outline your street patterns, your street types, as well as your public and open space that really set that, I'll say, more defined context for the public spaces and how development should occur within that public framework. The public framework for us is very important. It's how everybody in your community experiences your community, whether on the streets or in your parks and open spaces. So as we feel like we need to get that part of your zoning code right so that we can get the development patterns, the development scale, the development uses that people expect in your community to happen. So you'll look in the subdivision regulations when we talk about the public side, it's really the streets, the block sizes, the networks and things like that, as well as the land uses and zoning classifications that will guide development ultimately. Then when we start to look at the two main pieces, the subdivision and the zoning ordinance, we bring those two together. And this is where we want to spend some time tonight, is talking about the actual street design, street types and streetscape design, as well as the place types, which you have in your plan, and what that means for the development pattern, the form and function, to create, again, those development patterns across your community that signify and show the community that you're creating different and unique places within the city. And then finally, talking about zoning specifically, so getting into the zoning categories and things, this is where we really start to talk about development projects and how they happen on the ground. Again, relating those back to the public spaces that we've created for those areas to respond to. So we talk about block and lot access in terms of the public side, and then on the private side, we'll talk a little bit more about the frontage types, site design and buildings. So if you think about it kind of graphically, we want to work through the plan guidance into the zoning code and really talk about the context, those public spaces and the development land uses in general that people are trying to achieve, into the patterns where it's, again, we want to talk about tonight more specifically are the street types. And when we say street types, we're really talking about street design and the open space types, and again, the design of those spaces, as well as the place types and the building forms. So again, that public and private piece, we really think those two need to talk to each other and respond to each other to get the development that you all expect to have happen in the community. And then finally, with the zoning, the projects and how we implement the zoning code for private development. So for us, we take all of this, and if you haven't if you haven't latched onto this, we really take more of a design-based approach to the way we approach zoning codes in particular. So when we look at those things, instead of talking about things like density and relationships to of individual uses, we talk about street types. What's the street designed like? We talk about open space types. What's the design of that open space and what is it serving? We talk about block types, how those are put together. What's the street pattern and how that's connected? We talk about frontage types, talking about private development, how that building fronts that public open space or street, and then the building types. So instead of density, what types of buildings are we putting on there? Is it a single family house? Is it a multifamily unit? Is it a commercial building? Is it a mixed use building? And that allows us to kind of tailor these to the different zoning districts in your code, so that we can get the right pieces to match with each other in terms of public space and private development. So this is kind of a general approach for understanding. Across the top is what we would call kind of the conventional approach to zoning, which really is you have your plan, you have your regulations, you apply those regulations, and where they don't fit, a developer comes to this body and asks for forgiveness and to do something different. So that's either a PUD process or some sort of variance in terms of how that gets done in the process. What we really want to strive to do is, again, relate your new code back to your plan. So taking out of your plan those policies, those purpose statements, those intent statements of what you expect in your community, and bring those into the code so that we set an expectation, an intent-based code that really kind of strives to match that vision for the community. And then in the middle of that is really the standards that create certainty so that people understand what to expect when they're developing property, when they're investing in infrastructure, and those types of things. And then the process on the right side of that graph, or that bar, is really the process of where those standards are not fitting or not achieving exactly what we want, and there's maybe a better way of achieving those proposed. Then we have built-in flexibility so that we can still achieve the vision we want, that maybe in a little bit different manner that we hadn't anticipated. Yeah.
Question for you. This is only for new development and redevelopment, correct? That's the limit of the scope of this?
This would be an entire zoning code overhaul, so it would be all development.
So where I'm going with this is, I feel like there's gaps with how we do development and the community compliance. So how does this inform community compliance ordinances further down the road?
So particularly like code enforcement,
All
those
of
kind
that.
of things.
Yeah, because we got some areas of town that are starting to age and we need to keep them up, and we're trying to redevelop some areas, but we've also got some glaringly obvious places where either we don't have ordinances to enforce certain levels of code, or they don't have teeth to them. It's just a variety of things. And it can range from anything from people not mowing their grass to people, absentee landlords buying rental properties and not keeping them up.
Right.
Like, how does this kind of thing inform that?
Graham, I can maybe assist. I'm up here. Hi. So this zoning code, as Graham said, will apply to the city as a whole. However, obviously, existing structures have already been built, so you cannot apply these new regulations to them unless they come out of what they likely will have, if there's significant changes, the legal non-conforming status. As it relates to community compliance stuff, that is mainly contained in Title IV of our city code. So this is really not touching it. Zoning does have a play in compliance when it's related to, say, like a commercial use that's being done in a residentially zoned area. And we have used the zoning code to eliminate some of those uses that are not compatible with the surrounding area. We just used zoning code as far as semi-truck parking on a residential street. So sometimes they overlap, but a predominant amount of the community compliance provisions come from Title IV, and here we're really just talking about Title IX and Title X.
So my question was specifically about how does this inform community compliance issues? Can it, should it? I have a strong opinion.
I don't know if you guys have been tasked with that.
I'm not saying they have tasks, it's more of a question for the discussion, right? It's not for him.
Well, they're writing the code, so if that's something that you want them to incorporate, then that's kind of what this discussion is about.
Like, I could sit here and name 10 things right now where I think there's gaps. And I want to address that.
I think there's a part of it that can overlap, but I do think there are areas that are separate and don't align with zoning where they're community compliance, that it would not make sense to have them come into the zoning code.
I'm not talking about overlap.
What are your specific concerns, Doug?
So I hear things about, Councilman McKinney has been door knocking in Valley Junction area. And there are properties that have lots of junk and lots of trash. To me, if we're going to rezone everything and have these rules in place, that should inform what we do in Title IV. I don't know the titles. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what areas of code these are. But if we want this for certain things, that should inform other things that are downstream. I know we can't go back on people and enforce that until they come out of that code, but that should inform how we approach other things. And I think that there's a gap there today. And it's the spirit of what we're talking about here today and how it extends throughout our community, because then it becomes pervasive in the community. Either people care about this or they don't. And it's a very sleight of hand, very different sort of mindset for that. But I think that there's a gap between what we're trying to do here and what we enforce in those Title IV codes.
And I don't disagree with you there. I just, from a legal standpoint, don't think that this, what they're preparing, is the avenue to go through. I think a lot of those gaps, part of the reason that they're there is the requirement of due process. Us having to go through the notice period and taking somebody to court. We've talked about this ad nauseum at Community Compliance Subcommittee. The other problem is, and I don't want to turn this into a community compliance discussion, is the bodies that we have to enforce the code. You have currently of one person, because we're still trying to hire a second code compliance. So to go around and identify these things and identify that they're a violation and send the proper notice that is legally required to send, that you cannot get away from, regardless of if it's in the zoning code or if it's in a different chapter of the code.
I'm not asking you to do away with due process. I'm not asking any of that. I'm saying that there is a gap in between what we're doing here and what we enforce. And short staffing or not, doesn't matter. It's the philosophical piece of this. And so if we want our community to be a certain way, that needs to follow all the way through. So let's take this up on the community compliance meeting.
But when what we're dealing with today is what can go on the lot, what it needs to look like, how far away from the street and the other lot lines it needs to be.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
You know, I mean, but I hear what I think your frustration is in Title IV, community compliance.
Right.
And what exists today, how is it being enforced, and all those things.
And what I'm saying is, if we're doing this today, can that inform Title IV over time?
So you're saying you want us to include in this not only what can go on the lot, what it needs to look like, what the setbacks need to be, what the design needs to be, but also that your grass can't be taller than, 10 inches, that you have to, keep your sidewalk shoveled, that, you're saying you want to take everything that's in
No.
Title IV and put it here.
No, I think it's a philosophical thing.
So are you saying that if we're making this a priority by pushing, if we go the route that they're recommending and we're making it a priority of having our city look a certain way and focus on design versus your building is not just focusing on it being 25 feet away from the street, but we're really focusing on how does that use and the layout of the streets interplay with each other, and how do the uses, just like we talked about in the comp plan, how can we have these different types of uses together? Well, a lot of that is because of how they're built, how they're maintained, and how the streets are and the walkability and that. If we're going to make that a priority, we also need to make the enforcement of when people don't follow that a priority.
Like, I view this as a strategic thing that we're doing. Community compliance is a tactical thing.
Mm-hmm.
So community compliance needs to be informed by this. And that's it. And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to sideline. It's like it's a gap that I see. I want to address someday down the road. Don't change his scope of work. Don't do any of that. I'm just saying it out loud.
Your thought is that if somebody comes and they build a house and they know exactly what is expected of them on that property,
Yes.
what they can and cannot do, how they should maintain their property, what's acceptable in the backyard or not,
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff.
If you buy a property that's already built and 15 years old, nobody's telling you that. What's the expectations?
Right, but this wouldn't go with the home. This would be something they still have to seek out and know anyway,
Well, if it was in an ordinance in Title IV and very explicitly spelled out, better than maybe what we've done, that expectation would be set.
I think I understand what you're saying. If we're making this a priority, we're changing this, we're trying to make it better and more informed and for the citizens and to make the city continue to be what we have been. We need to work on Title IV to make that more detailed, more specific, so that way it is easier to enforce when we need to.
It's not just about new developments, about the places that already exist as well. Yes, I think.
But the problem is that even if we did that, I see what you're saying, but even if we did that, it doesn't run with the land, it doesn't run with the house. It's not in the deed to the property, like, you know, somebody could move,
It's like an easement that when you buy it. it's
But
spelled out in-
how do we make somebody take down an ash tree?
how do we make them do that?
We notify them by.
Notify them through,
That's right. I'm just saying that there's work to be done there.
right, but if you moved into a house, you're not going to be handed over, you know, here's what the zoning code is.
No, I'm not saying that either.
Okay,
We can take it offline.
well, yeah.
Sorry.
Well, and
I see what you're, I see what you're getting at.
I might
see what
just
you're
offer,
getting at.
where there is overlap, and there's not, I don't think there's a significant amount of overlap, but where there is, this will write the rules, and then Title IV will enforce that. So there is a separation there.
You just want more upfront, so the person knows upfront what's expected before they come, you know, have something slapped down on them with Title IV.
Yeah, and it's almost like, what's the expectation of the community as a whole?
Right, I hear you. I mean, does any community that you guys have worked with have that? I mean, maybe you'd be the first.
No, I think what I'm hearing, Chris Brewster, by the way, we're sensitive to those issues. Usually, as the city attorney said, it's property maintenance issues are different than development standards. They're enforcing different nuisance level type things, some of the things you described. So that's where there's usually not overlap. Where there might be the types of things we plan on catching in development review if there was an upgrade of landscape standards. That's obviously not going to apply retroactively to existing property, but it is setting that expectation you're talking about. The other thing we're sensitive to is we don't want these new standards to create next year's enforcement and maintenance problems. So we're always cognizant of, okay, we can enforce these things through development review. Can you continue to enforce them over the 10 years after development review? So we're kind of paying attention to those types of things too, so that those two titles are getting an efficient system as much as they can and where they overlap.
All right, anything else on this, Doug?
I'll step down.
All right, I think we all hear what you're saying, what you're getting after. So, all right, go ahead.
Thanks. So as I mentioned, we look at this from a design-based approach. And so what we've been working on is something called a pattern book, in which we've really focused on kind of these first three categories in terms of street types, open and civic space types, and then block types. And what we've tried to do with the pattern book, again, is take your land use and place types from the plan, and really focus in on public space. And how we tie those two things together, and how we ultimately get to the zoning categories and the zoning rules, really, and development standards that we want to follow. And so taking those out of your plan, the land use and place types, this is what you've got today. And what we're proposing is to add what we're calling the public space frameworks to, not necessarily into the plan, but into this pattern book, which ultimately can be a tool for people to use, as well as the zoning code. And the reason we think public space frameworks are so important is not only that last bullet there, do they set the development framework, as I already mentioned, but they also are integral to the connectivity and access within the community, creating an open space framework and network, which ultimately can contribute to a lot of different things, including stormwater management at a variety of scales in your community, to make sure those types of broader community-wide systems are addressed. And then also they contribute to the community character through those design aspects. So going back to that table, the public space frameworks, we had identified two of them. One we called open and civic space, and one we called street network. And it's really, when we talk about open and civic spaces, we're talking about the sizes and types of spaces. And then on the street network, we're really talking about the level of connectivity and then the type or the design of specific streets. So tying it to the land use and the place types, we really tried to keep it simple and look at it in some very simple terms about the different sizes, and keeping it really simple: small, medium, and large on the open space. The connectivity on the streetscape or the street side is low, medium, and high. And then the different types are intended to be more design oriented, so that we're intentional about the types of places we're trying to create, the public places we're trying to create in relationship to the development that we want.
Sorry, if I could just ask on that last slide there.
Yeah.
So as you look at, it almost seems a little different to me that we would have small to medium open space next to mixed residential, or small to medium next to medium, or small to medium, frankly, next to multi-use high. In other words, I guess, and maybe I'm not saying this right, but where you have more people living and next to each other, it seems like you'd want a larger space. And when you look at, when I think of industrial low or industrial high, I think of warehouse. I think of data center.
Yeah.
And I don't, and then we're talking about medium to large. In other words, I don't know that what you're saying is what I'm about to say, but it stood out to me like, why would we want to have a large green space next to Microsoft where not a lot of people are really accessible?
Yeah.
But rather it seems to me like we'd want a larger green space next to the housing development so that kids and families could go out and visit it, because they're not going to go down to the Microsoft facility next, or
Yeah.
a warehouse, or even worse, say it's a manufacturing and they're putting out, there's large semis in the area, and it seems reverse to me, so.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is this is kind of general guidance. It's not hard and fast that you have to have small and medium. But what we are getting at is when you look at the context in which these things are happening, if you have mixed residential or if you have multi-use areas, they're typically more intense. The street pattern is more connected. So the opportunity to provide more smaller or medium spaces to serve everyone is there, as opposed to, while you're also maintaining a development pattern that's more connected, more walkable, and more relatable to multiple properties. But you could carve out a space where you had a large public space that would serve a larger area. But typically, as you're building those areas, you'd want to insert, and we've got some graphics, and I apologize, we loaded the previously edited version of this presentation. But what we're trying to say is within those different contexts, we want to have a variety of open space types. So from small to medium to large, but what would typically go with those different contexts is what we're talking about. But you could apply really any of these to any of those different types of spaces. So the small would be 1/4 acre to 10 acre, all the way up to large, which we typically find in large public or civic spaces or in natural areas like the image on the right shows. And then when we talk about types, this is where we could get into a discrepancy in size as well. The different types are anything from multi-use paths or greenways to dedicated recreational facilities. One of your open space types in your place types is actually recreational, but those things include courts, athletic fields, whatever the case may be. Natural areas, as I talked about, in terms of rural areas, or maybe it's a streamway or a natural feature that needs to be protected. Plazas, which are much more urban in scale, smaller, that relate to a lot of buildings in a more walkable and dense environment. And then the park, just the typical park, what we would think of as a neighborhood or a community scale park that serves a neighborhood or multiple neighborhoods. And so as we applied these, again, it's not a kind of a one for one. It's really, what is the context we're trying to create? So in the top left, if you're looking at those more connected areas, the smaller scale development pattern, looking at those in terms of the smaller open space types, which typically would be well designed in terms of playgrounds or other passive uses within a specific area. Trails may cut through the area or serve a specific neighborhood or district. And then recreational facilities, again, whether that's a playground or things that are designed specifically for an area. And then you can go through the medium, which would be those larger tracts of land, which is typically more on the suburban scale, which would, again, serve multiple neighborhoods. Could be programmed or could be designed. It might be natural, it could be a trail, it could be any one of those things. And then the large ones are really those really large areas, which are natural areas, typically found at the edge of the community or running through the community in an area that's a protected greenway or natural feature, and then design space and trails. And again, the thing to remember about the open space network, and a little bit when we talk about streets, is really the ability to handle some of those larger systems like stormwater in your community at more of a district or even a neighborhood or even a citywide scale. Again, different pieces that we pulled out of different case studies in terms of the variety of different open space and civic types, from the plaza on the lower left to broader natural areas on the top left, to little neighborhood spaces as well as greenways there in the middle right. And the idea is to match the open space type to the environment, the development environment that you want. And then when we move into streets, it's really about connectivity and it's about street design. So where we see low connectivity, the graphic on the left here, we're really talking about more rural areas that aren't ripe for a lot of development. And so they'll be less connected. You'll have a lot of traffic flowing through a couple of main arterials or main arteries, and then everything kind of building off of that. To the medium, which would be more typical of we would call that a suburban development environment in terms of a couple of main arterials, again, with more collectors and other roadways feeding off of that to feed neighborhoods, to feed other destinations off those streets. And then the high level of connectivity is more similar to something like a Valley Junction or a more urban walkable area that's connected and compact. So again, trying to identify the different types of streets that are appropriate for those different contexts. These are just some basic images of the variety of streets and how you can divide up the spaces within the right-of-way to tailor the street towards the type of environment and the type of development that you expect in those areas. So again, moving through the low connectivity areas, really looking at the different types of streets in terms of moving traffic and pedestrians, which is the balanced kind of approach, which it's not just about moving automobiles, but it's also moving about pedestrians and potentially bikes, to a traffic street, which is really about those big arterials that need to move automobiles from one point to another and move them efficiently. And then what we call service areas, which is getting into some of those larger developments that you may see on the outskirts, those industrial parks and things like that, those service roads that are intended for larger vehicles, a lot of deliveries, and those types of operations. The medium is really, again, that kind of suburban pattern, that block pattern that has an opportunity for not only traffic moving on the major arterials or the major routes, but also balanced and more pedestrian oriented streets, particularly within the neighborhood. So really focusing on pedestrian connectivity within the neighborhood versus a more balanced approach to the collectors, and then a high level of traffic movement along the arterials and things like that. And then the high connectivity, ideally within this pattern, you're going to focus a lot on pedestrian activity because it's so well connected, giving people the ability to not only drive, but also walk. And in some cases, make it easier to walk. But there's also an opportunity for balanced streets as well as moving traffic to and through these areas. So again, a variety of different street types, from some very urban areas to specific neighborhoods, and those neighborhood streets in which people can walk and also drive and park on the street, to rural lanes that have no curb and gutter and things like that. So again, trying to align different street types with the variety of places we're trying to create. So that's what we've been working on the pattern book in terms of trying to relate the different public space frameworks to the land use and your place types for implementation of the plan. And now I'm going to let Chris kind of walk through the development patterns is the piece that really kind of brings this all together. And so what we're trying to shoot for is how do we align all these different elements in the zoning code to allow you to put these pieces together to get the development, the patterns, the connectivity, the access that you all desire in different developments. Real quickly before I turn it over to Chris, sorry. This is just a few pages from the pattern book. So we went into detail about each one of your place types, which is the title at the top left, and the definition of that place type. And then the land use down the left-hand side of the table, and then applying those open space and civic types. So you'll see here in rural residential, we gave an image of this where you still may have broad swaths of land in agricultural uses or natural uses, surrounded by a large lot subdivision or a large lot neighborhood. So there's opportunities for large open space. They could be natural areas, they could be preserved areas, they could also be planned areas. And then similarly on street connectivity, depending on the different land use, whether it's open space, detached residential, you have an opportunity to do things differently with your street networks and your street types. And then we went through a few of your place types. Traditional neighborhood, which is a little more compact, a little more connected, looking at land uses that include detached residential, mixed residential, and what your plan calls for as multi-use low, which includes a lot of different things in terms of land uses, including residential and multifamily and some commercial. So again, graduating kind of through those different contexts, those different levels of intensity in terms of uses and development patterns to align the open space and the street patterns with those. Again, here's integrated use, which is much more of a mixed use in different scales, multi-use low being the low scale, multi-use medium, and multi-use high being a higher scale of intensity, predominantly commercial, but also mixed use, predominantly mixed use, including residential, but higher intensity residential. And so again, you can see as you graduate in intensity, really kind of tailoring the open space and street networks to those different types. And then office. And so we took this table and then we started to look at, on the far right in the red box, started to look at the zoning districts that could be realigned within your current code, pulling those out and looking at how we could realign, add to them, subtract from them, and look at how we implement the context and the place types more directly in terms of the zoning code. And I'll let Chris kind of walk through some of the zoning discussion.
Thanks, Graham. Again, Chris Brewster with Multi-Studio. So we've begun drafting the code, and that was where this idea for the pattern book came from, because I think from Graham's presentation, different standards in different places of your community, particularly dealing with those larger civic spaces. So then when we get down to the details of a zoning code of how does a project come together, all of the things that are shaded out are going to impact what the standard should be in one particular area of your community or not. So that's what we're using these for, so that we begin to regulate typologies where they make sense based on that public space framework. So we're literally taking data that we're finding from areas of your community that are measured, or filling in the gaps from your plan of areas that aren't reflected in your community right now, and using those to have different standards for different places in your community. And a lot of that's coming from the subdivision regulations in Title 10. So when we shift from an emphasis on design, we're also shifting from basing our standards strictly on land use to basing them more on form and design. So an easy way to think of this slide is the same land use could be dramatically different at a different form or in a different design, yet different land uses can be quite compatible and complementary if they have a similar form and design. So your plan based on place types talking about these things, it's important to shift the zoning standards from less about strictly about land use, and let's look at more of these other things about form and design that make the projects come together and be complementary in certain places. With the residential standards, housing and neighborhood design and housing options, a big part of your plan. So our plan here is to shift more towards what we call a building type approach. So that means not relying so much on just lot size and density, particularly in some districts where you want to mix housing types. So it's literally writing the standards towards a particular type. A row house, what are the dimensions and standards for that? A small apartment, what are the dimensions and standards for that? And then we can determine, okay, which districts should those mix, which districts should those be separate. So we're literally shifting your residential districts to a typology-based approach. We feel that will give you everything you have right now in your current code, but it'll also start adding in things that aren't as easily developed under your current code, and they're maybe being done through PUDs. We've already talked to developers that are developing in PUDs that are experiencing this problem. We've looked at some of your PUDs that have certain building types that we want to see built more, and so we plan on building those into the code as well. And so when we get to the standards on each of those types, it's an exercise we're doing with staff right now, is then we can go back and start pinning those types of which districts do they belong in, and building your new residential structure based on that. This is an example of how we're trying to do that with some of the proposed residential districts that you see on the left. So what we're doing is we're checking ourselves to, one, make sure that all of the context and place types in your comprehensive plan are addressed, and then can we get all of those building types that we're trying to do in fewer districts to create a simpler system. So what's going down the left of the screen is what we hope to be coming back to you with on the range of residential districts that you need moving forward, and it should be able to address everything that you would need from a residential development standpoint. One of the other things that we're working on is the idea of not resorting to PUDs as much as you currently are. There's a lot of good reasons to get out of that. A main one is expectations for developers and process. Another one is how do you administer them going forward? The last thing we want is the community to be left with 100 different PUDs that are all essentially just their own self-contained development code, and then you have to know 100 different codes. So this typology-based approach can also help us reform the plan zoning process. So we want to be doing more things with your base districts, the base zoning districts we end up with, but then we also want to keep the good part, the flexibility of those plan districts, and start using those plans truly for master plan type projects. And if someone needs flexibility on a particular site or project, we'll have other things in the code that can give them flexibility to implement some of the concepts. But the overall theme of this is trying to reserve plan zoning for things that are truly master plan. And even when we are doing that, to try to be basing it off some of the same things that non-plan zoning, the straight or base zoning districts are using. And then the last overall thing is these are some overarching goals that we're trying to accomplish. We want to simplify your code, consolidating districts so you don't have as many. Simplifying permitted land uses. You currently have a very complex land use approach using the standard industrialized code, which is really built for a different purpose than planning and zoning. So we plan on simplifying that and adding some more flexibility into it. Essentially, we want to leave all of the zoning districts on a roughly equivalent place that they are right now, but have a lot more flexibility towards the uses. One of the ways we can do that is if we are more assured of what the form, scale, and design of uses are, you can be a lot more flexible with the uses themselves. And then better organizing the design standards, the typologies that we're going through and the things that we're measuring can do that. So even when we are having more community design standards matching your plans, emphasis on community design, by grouping them into types that go together, street type, frontage type, building type, there's kind of a menu option of things that can go together. We can have a simpler approach to community design, even though we might be regulating more things from a design perspective. And then the last part, creating flexibility. So things we're looking at are flexibility within the standards. So different standards in different contexts. We kind of already have talked about that your block sizes might be different in one area of the community versus the other, and we'll build that into the code. So there's the first blush of flexibility. Second, we do plan on having what's been mentioned as intent-based standards. So things that we put a lot of pride into writing intent statements so that you can judge applications or even applying a standard based on is it meeting the intent. And then lastly, when they're not meeting the intent, having some flexibility that may not be just that variance, more things delegated to staff, more things that can be done through planning commission or council through the process that meet the standard but aren't a variance. So if we build them into the code that here's a range of options, and if you meet these criteria, you can have a range of options, there should be an easier process for some of those things. So focusing more on results and mitigating impacts rather than just are you meeting the letter of the law. So this last slide is a summary of some of those overarching topics that we would like to start hearing more from you on. The first, just the overall general simplification, flexibility, and streamlining. What does that mean? Right now, we're already working with the procedure section of the code and looking for ways that we take the typical application, run it through, how is it working now, what review bodies need to be reviewing it, what criteria those decisions made on, and trying to get that to be a more efficient and streamlined process. More flexibility in the code. How do people get results they want? And if we are really intentional about building that through some of these design-based standards, can we have a bigger range of acceptable outcomes that come out of it? And in doing so, are we delegating more decisions down to the staff level before they would rise up to planning commission or council? So again, all things that we're working through to think about that we'll be looking for you all from direction. Emphasis on community design, again, a focus on some of those things that we're beginning to talk about in the pattern book that we're measuring are just as important as the aesthetic and style things that you're trying to elevate as well. So we want to make sure we don't overlook those because they're good cues to how a good project comes together. And so not that we're not looking at the aesthetics and the style elements, but we think there's some other important design aspects to emphasize in the code. Integrating zoning and subdivision regulations. This is a big topic. We've gotten some questions with staff on, this is a zoning code update, but it's our view that we need to be doing Title 10 along with Title 9 as well. Title 10 being the subdivision regulations, Title 9 being the zoning, simply because it addressed all of those big picture items that we're talking about, street networks, open space systems. How do you integrate streets across projects, something that we've heard issues about in some of the current things that are going on. How do we integrate stormwater solutions across projects so that we're not just resorting to detention on individual sites? So the subdivision regulations are going to be our tool to do that, and so that's why we think it's an important thing to integrate into this overall development code. Residential design and development standards based on housing types and a building type approach. We can get a greater mix within some districts. Certainly not all of your residential districts will have a mix of housing types, but there's certainly some that are ripe for it because, one, they allow it now, and two, our observation is they don't allow enough of a mix, and it might be because we don't have enough of the emphasis on some of those design standards that allow things to mix well together. And then the last bigger one is, reforming the PUD process. One, so it's not used as broadly and widely as it is. Two, so that we can do more of the good things that are happening under PUDs without having to do a PUD, that your zoning districts would be geared for that. And then three, that when you do end up needing to do a master plan or a plan development, that we're still basing it off of a common starting point. And it's not just a blank slate and you don't end up with 100 different development codes in your community. So again, those are big picture ideas, and from there we'll open it up to any questions or discussions if you have them, if we're headed in the right direction on some of these ideas.
Well, let me be the first to say that this is what you guys do for a living. So you really speak this language. You understand the ins and outs of everything going on here. This is, I think, more difficult for all of us to grasp sitting up here, all the intricacies of what you're looking to do here. And so my head is kind of spinning. And what's going through my head right now is, what are the pros and cons of what you've presented? And what are the unintended consequences? And what is its practical application? Mm-hmm. Going through all these things, are we going to have a situation where, I don't know, just making it up, we've got a, triplex sitting next to a single-family home, or, what are the unintended consequences of what we're looking at doing? It's just a lot to digest and try to make sense of. I mean, I understand the gist of what you're looking to do, but we're going to have probably another session or two or three before we can completely understand the implications of all this. I'm just being real honest. And it's not that you guys have done a poor job communicating it. It's just that we're not planners for a living, and we're trying to digest it and understand what it is that you're presenting to us and how this is going to present in our city when you're done. We can't, it's like this, abstract thing. How does that look? I don't know. Councilman.
Yeah, thank you. And Mayor, I think you raised a lot of good questions, and appreciate the presentation tonight. As the mayor said, this is what you work on and eat, breathe, sleep all the time, I'm sure. And I guess what I'd like to, not for today, but maybe our next conversation or at some appropriate time, if this comes before development planning or however the appropriate protocol that this does come, is let's say you were looking at it through the lens of the planning and zoning Commission, the P&Z, who's going to at least initially see this regularly, or even the council who's going to see it regularly down the road. What kind of questions should we be asking, at this point, or what sort of scenarios are going to present themselves that are going to be the difficult scenarios, like the triplex next to a single-family residential? What are those kind of hard questions, difficult situations? Because there's going to be them. Everything's not going to be, just easy street. And so helping us understand what those difficult scenarios are so that we can then, before we adopt it, better understand what the bumpy road might be looking like and how we can best address it in advance of adopting it.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's a great point. That's what is there some concrete example, something that we can see based on what you've designed, Because
Yeah.
right now, it's just so abstract to try to.
Well, and I think we would think of that question more in terms of the development process too, like, some of these ideas, what we deal with are ideas that are large and transformative, which those types of projects may not come on very often, and you've already had a couple big ones in your community's history. But also then the smaller projects that maybe they don't have as large a land area, so how do those connect to the adjacent project? Those are the ones we find that are the most difficult challenge of implementing some of the ideas that are in your plan. And so we'll certainly prepare some examples or strategies for doing that going forward. A lot of these ideas are abstract, to be honest with you right now, because we're taking the pattern book, your current code, and creating what we're calling internal worksheets, where we're going, okay, where would the standards line up on this? And when it comes back as a standard, it'll be more concrete to you all, and we will map them out of like, where is this changing from your current standards? That's another one of those bigger problems or bigger issues. You have a large community that's already zoned, so we're using those same zoning districts. What are the changes in those districts mean to people that don't plan to develop or that have property? We're trying to do as little change to those situations going forward as well. So we'll map some of those things out for you.
I think that
Other question? Oh, Councilman McKinney, go ahead. Then
just a couple
Trevilian.
more, however you want it. So that'd be helpful, number one. So thank you for that. Number two, can you give us a sense of timing? I know what I saw in there was the undeveloped areas of the city. Is this exclusively related to that, or is this going to apply uniformly all at once?
This will apply uniformly all at once. So that's kind of what I just mentioned is, we need to be aware of, we're dealing with your current zoning districts. And so that's why that exercise of matching what's there now and where do we put some of those residential building types versus the districts that maybe aren't used as much are the ones we typically try to leverage and go, okay, there's probably a reason it wasn't used as much, or there's a reason someone elected to do a PUD rather than use one of your mixed density residential districts. Let's figure out what that is and let's build some of those things into that district so it can be used going forward. So those are some of the exercises we're doing. But the bigger question, the simple answer is, we do not want to leave you with two different development codes.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do it all at once. Can you give us a sense of timing in terms of where you're at today versus when we might realistically see something go before P&Z? I assume it goes before B&C and then it comes to full council.
Yeah, so two answers, not to hedge on that. Timing for us, as I mentioned, we're just now starting to roll out some of the first chapters on the development code where we're actually taking some of the analysis and writing codes. So over the next month, we plan to have what we call a working draft of the development code. Now, that working draft is just being reviewed by staff, and then at some point, we'll be thinking, okay, these are things we should advance to our advisory committee and the planning commission. So that might be a little longer tail. It's something that we'll have to be cognizant of, like your guys' first reaction of my head spinning. It'll take some time. That's why I don't want to commit to a time on that of like when will something be ready for adoption. It may take a little more time, but I will say that within the next month, we'll have what we would consider a conceptual code to roll out and begin looking at, okay, how do we need to discuss this? And I will say also, usually our first draft, lots of changes occur in the discussion as we go through and talk about things.
I understand. Can you give us, are we targeting the end of the year? Are we targeting a year from now? I'm not going to hold you to it. It's just nice to know generally.
I will say from our standpoint, once we have something that we feel is a code to review, We typically would not want to go longer than 9 months with that process. Now, things happen that cause it to slow down, either priorities of the committee, maybe we run into issues of things that in the code aren't right that need more time. But in general, about a 9 month to a year process from writing to going like, here's something to adopt is a good strategy. We've done them where we've advanced sections that need to go faster, and we can do that as well, but that's be my.
Lynn's coming up as well. Do you want to speak?
Just a quick note, once we get the draft, there's a technical committee of staff that'll go through it along with legal. We still would need to do outreach. We have a developers group and basically design professionals that are part of our advisory committee, but we would still want to do outreach to developers, to consultants and everybody and go that path. So even after we kind of work through the draft, there's probably a 30 to 60 day of just us getting it out and getting people familiar with it and working through it that way too. So add
And that's
that
an
on
important,
too.
yeah, that's an important component to all this. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think hopefully my last question is, I don't know how much time you've spent in the community here, but of course, Valley Junction, there's been a lot of work done relative to design guidelines in Valley Junction. There were also conversations about transition zones of Valley Junction. Recognizing this is going to apply uniformly around the city, are we carving out some
Yes.
areas, or how's that? Can you
Yeah,
help us
so
understand?
we're well aware of those issues. We're working with staff on making sure that we are cognizant of all those efforts. So we would like to come up with this, we personally, as consultants, there's a lot of really good things about those areas, which is why people care about them so much. And so there's things in there that we think are reflective, should be reflective of neighborhoods elsewhere. And so to the extent we can get those to work in two different places, again, a lot of that depends on, there's dramatically different street network, dramatically different public spaces. But if that were to be built somewhere else, we would want that to be eligible. So we wouldn't necessarily want to say that's just Valley Junction. We would like maybe some of those ideas to be portable elsewhere. But at the end of the day, if we can't capture that, then there could be a Valley Junction type thing that remains like you have now. But our goal would be to try to get them merged into the general development code so that some of those ideas could carry over. I do think that the idea of having overlay districts or special purpose districts is an important tool to have, and so we would see that being preserved in here in some capacity, and probably not even just for Valley Junction, but there could be other special planning efforts that come along that you would need to carve out as well. So,
Are there other cities that have switched to this type of approach?
yes. So I would say a lot of any city that's doing their development, rewriting their development code right now is starting to shift towards this. What we're essentially doing are there's a planning jargon term called form-based codes, which says let's de-emphasize regulation on use, that slide I had of use, format and scale, and stress community design. So a lot of communities are gravitating towards that. How exactly they do it is, there is different as each code probably, but overall a shift towards where we're going with this is happening in a lot of cities.
How long has this been around?
This kind of approach?
Yeah.
Well, I'll go back to it. The PUD idea really is this, the idea that conventional zoning isn't matching what we want to see as far as end results. That generated planners creating PUDs, which happened like in the 70s or 80s. The idea of form-based codes, in other words, let's look at streets, open space, and building types and start doing more design standards, that probably came into being around the 2000 and moved up from there. Those initial efforts were all specific areas where you did a specific master plan. They weren't often done citywide. So I think the trend to start incorporating these ideas in a citywide code have been going on for the last 15 to 20 years or so.
Can you get staff a list of the cities that have switched to this over those last 10 years?
Yeah, we
I'd
can
like
give
to research that.
Yeah, we can give. It would probably be a list of who's used bits and pieces of what we're talking about, but we can certainly give a list of comparable codes, either ones done by us or done by others, and probably a mix of both.
Thank you.
Kevin, Des Moines switched to a form-based code about 4 years ago, but they're strictly form-based, and having a planning undergraduate degree, this approach is better than what Des Moines did. Because just strict form-based has its challenges. So I think that's why you guys have incorporated some of the other
We did get a lot of
elements.
feedback from the development focus groups to do not do what Des
Don't
Moines
do what Des Moines did.
So when you first said that, I was like, oh, no.
Yeah, no,
But
I
yeah.
mean, they did it, but not with the other elements you're incorporating.
And we're trying to take there's lots of good ideas in those that there's a mismatch between doing it for a specific project and versus doing it citywide. So when we do it citywide, we need to be cognizant of making it fit into your entire system of development.
Okay. But yeah, I'd like to get a list of those that have done it citywide, because this is a huge change, as Russ pointed out, so.
Yeah.
Two questions. So when it comes to the places where, I guess there's already a lot of development, but maybe there's just some open space for potential development. I guess when it comes to the general simplification, flexibility, and streamlining you see as the first one on your list here, I guess when it comes to a switch from whatever the current zoning is to this new process, I know there's a lot more flexibility. How can we almost provide a guarantee for our current residents that something nearby that's open space, potentially developable, isn't going to change drastically within the new, more flexible guidelines?
Yeah, great question. And I have a two-part way of answering it. The first way is there's a lot of districts that we will call them kind of status quo districts. So a good way to think of it is your RS or R1 zoning districts. We would not anticipate any large-scale changes to that. So to the extent that property's in there, we can pretty much assure that what could be built today is what's going to be built tomorrow, with maybe a couple of slight different options, but nothing that would be glaringly different. So it's more in the districts where it's already intended for a mix, or it's already intended for higher density. That's where we might have a range of better options. On the flexibility standpoint, that's kind of yet to be determined, but one of the things I'm sure that the city attorney will chime in, if we're going to build flexibility in the code, it has to be, that's what we mean by intent-based code. So the code should build, if we haven't built expectations for everyone involved, from a developer coming into the process, for you all as decision makers, or to a property owner that has vacant property next to them that might develop, we'll want them to be able to open that book and understand what could be developed there, or open that book and understand what the flexible options are. And so that's our kind of to be determined. We'll figure that out, but it's something we have to figure out on all of these projects.
And then the second question would be, when it comes to your fourth one here, we talk about shift to a building type rather than a density approach. So for example, maybe there's a medium density that's a 12 unit per acre situation, right? When it comes to a building type, I guess, what's the difference between kind of doing the quick math and saying, oh, well, 12 units per acre, that would wind up with 12 two-story townhomes that are 1,500 square feet.
Right.
So I guess what's the difference in saying you can have 12 units per acre or having a building type they have to be 1,500 square feet and 2 stories?
Yeah.
If that is building type, if
Right,
that's what we
that's
mean.
a good question. So the way take the 12 units per acre, is that when we switch to a building type approach, that will tell us, is that 12 units on an acre, 12 separate buildings? Is it one building that's 12 units and it takes up the whole acre? So those are all, the building types, whether they go together or not, could be completely disjointed from what that density number is, because it's just a math equation. Whereas if you took that, hey, we want a small apartment building, that might actually be 50 units an acre, but it only has 6 units and it's only 2 stories or 3 stories and it fits in somewhere. But if you did the math on that, your density number would appear quite large. And so that's why we shift to a building type approach, because it's the idea that the scale of the building matters more than what the actual density is.
So I totally see what you're saying there, but if we had a 12 medium zoning right now and we switch to a building type, what we really want is four 3-plexes of townhomes.
Yes.
And that would be your 12. And again, the goal is not to make it to 12, but that's probably what could fit. And if we switch to that, what's to prevent a developer from coming in and saying, actually, no, we don't want to do that. We want that small apartment building on there. And in
Yeah.
which case, aren't we in the exact same place that we came before when it came to flexibility? It's just on the front end rather than a back end PUD. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think,
I'm not angry, I'm just curious.
no, yeah, it's a good question. I think our point would be, it's only going to be certain districts where the building type approach is going to give them options. But what we would say is those options all better be complementary or compatible when we do that. And the density number might not be what makes it compatible. It certainly is going to, it's not to say we throw that out completely. In other words, they're all going to be within the same range. But we'll do the exercise of going, a good example might be that 3 townhome building you're mentioning. Is that different from an 8 townhome building, which is a much larger footprint? Or is it 3 townhomes at 2,000 square feet versus 8 townhomes at 4,000 square feet per unit? Those 2 buildings are dramatically different in scale, yet they're both townhomes. So we'd want to be making those distinctions so that your highest density zoning districts are for your biggest buildings, your biggest footprint buildings and your biggest height buildings.
Okay.
How many units come into them, we find, I don't want to say secondary, because obviously things like infrastructure, utilities, parking, those all got to be addressed, and those are directly related to how many units you have. But at least a little less emphasis on that can allow us to fit more options together in some districts.
Sure. Well, Graham, Chris, thank you so much for helping out. Those are my questions, and I know this will be a continued conversation. I appreciate it.
Councilwoman Hardman.
And thank you, too, for the information. It is overwhelming, it's a lot of information, but it's the first bite at the apple, so I'm sure we'll hear so much more. What have you learned from other cities having done some of this stuff? What heartburns have you learned? Are there things that you've tweaked from what you may have recommended with other municipalities?
That's an interesting question. I hadn't thought of that much. I would say it's certainly one of the things we brought up earlier is the last thing we want to do is leave you all with standards that either don't raise expectations for people or that won't get implemented by staff. So the question earlier on, what if we have all these standards? How do we enforce them going forward? So we're usually trying not to regulate anything that you're not regulating already. So, for example, you do have a lot of design standards. What we're trying to do is say, let's regulate them in a different way so that they are more keyed towards the context and the place types that are in your plan. Different way of looking at it. So I think that I didn't really answer a lesson learned, but I think a lesson learned listening to how other people will interpret and enforce the standards is important. I think we've learned from most communities that getting out of the PUD business is a good thing. We've worked with some communities that we just finished up a code a little over a year ago. 75% of their community was PUD, and they had a lot of staff turnover in their planning department. So planners came in and they needed to learn 10 or 12 different codes. And even property owners, it's a surprise to say, hey, I want to change something about my house 20 years down the road or my building, and I want to do something that seems pretty simple. But because that PUD said these are the standards, that change triggers a change to your PUD. You're now kicked into a whole zoning process. So it's problems like that we learn along the way, that we're looking for procedural mechanisms to help with those situations.
Okay, because that's important. I mean, you've been at this business for a bit, and so what kinds of things you've learned from other cities might be really beneficial for us, so.
Can I add one?
Yeah.
I want to, it's, and Chris might hit me later, but the one I think we've learned, and Chris is really good at this, is paying attention to the nuances and the details of things really matters. If you've paid attention to zoning at all for the last 2 or 3 years, which I don't blame you if you haven't, this whole movement towards making single-family zoning illegal in our communities is kind of a big kind of movement, I would say.
What's a movement?
So like the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, they pitch it as making single-family zoning illegal. And that's not really what they're doing. What they're doing is saying all of our districts will enable up to 4 units on a single lot. And that's a big movement that a lot of communities are taking on to build housing market, to build additional units, to build a lot of different things. I think what we've learned over the last couple of years in particular, through a lot of those dialogues that other communities are having, is that not paying attention to the details of individual neighborhoods, it really matters that you have to pay attention. This idea of, and a lot of it is, I will say a lot of it is sales, a lot of it is marketing. Look at what we've done. But if you don't pay attention to the details of what's going on in individual districts and neighborhoods, you're going to miss something. You're going to miss something. And I'm going to tell you on the flip side of that, the day this gets done, it's not all going to be right. There's going to be stuff that's going to be wrong, but we want to pay attention to the nuances of how development has occurred in the past, so that when those things, when the new zoning code comes into play, that those things are sensitive to those different areas. Not that those areas may not change a little bit, but that we want to be sensitive to how they change. So I think that's a big, and that's a big thing that I think we've learned, that the nuances matter.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, the way I'm looking at this, my layman's view of this is we have a comprehensive plan now that provides flexibility for developers so that we're not having all kinds of, 111 comprehensive plan amendments. So maybe a developer in this particular area can do development 1, 2, 3, or 4, and maybe that's multi-family residential or commercial or, I don't know, 2 other things. But now what you guys are coming in saying is, okay, to the extent that you do commercial here, here's the building you can put up, here's what it's going to look like, here are the specific standards for option 1. Option 1 are going to be these specific standards. Option 2, they're going to be these specific standards. Option 3 is these standards. Option 4 are these standards. So you've got the flexibility with the comprehensive plan, and then this kind of drills down and gets more specific. And then we're also not doing all these PUDs and, look, within this area, you can do these 4 different things. If you pick number 1, these are the standards that apply to this. The building can look like this, or it can look like this, or it can look like this. Period.
Yes,
Right?
and the thing I would add is some of the things we were mentioning before about the context. Your options will and could or should be determined by which of those contexts you're in. The street networks, the street type, and the open space that supports it matters. And so that should determine your range of options. So you might get into a context where you really only have one option. You're going to do it this way. So it's possible to end up at that point in some of these areas as well. So an example, if a place was built with the pedestrian-oriented streets with on-street parking and wide sidewalks, your building type should really be option 1. You're building to the street, you're having a transparent pedestrian-oriented street front, and that's what you're doing here. You may have a lot of options on the uses you could put in that building, but as far as the design, scale, and pattern, you should be building according to your context.
So then let me ask you this, because this became an issue, and that is how the size of the building, and not to bring this back, you can break it up with the design and all
Yeah.
that, but are we going to have something in here that's going to say on, if you're doing a commercial building, and the lot size is 10 acres, you can figure out the total square footage or the footprint of that building, what your footprint is going to be allowed to be based on the size of the lot that it's going on. Is it going to be prescriptive to that point, or how are people going to know when we have an economic development prospect coming in, looking at wanting to do a 100,000 square foot building, that they can do it specifically on this? What acreage do they need to be able to do that? Is this going to specify that?
This will have districts that specify that. It would be like, if it's a really large-scale building, it should go in one of your more intense commercial zone districts.
But then within that more intense commercial zone district, does it specify how big that footprint can be? Will the zoning specify that?
We haven't gotten there yet, but I
Okay.
do understand the question because we are aware of the conversation that was going on.
Okay.
I would say in most codes we do, there is always a zone district that's what we would call kind of the status quo. So there's a zone district that's based on, as long as you meet the setbacks and meet the minimum lot size, it can be whatever size it needs to be. There's other districts that would say, well, we want a mix of things happening here, and therefore things should be small scale. So we would anticipate in some fashion having those options. One fits in one context, the other fits in a different context.
Okay. And I think just to remind the council, we did have a discussion about, Greg, you were getting it after this, specific to residential. We were worried about with the flexibility, what that might do to somebody, because that's where you're going to have, people that are living in residential homes that maybe abut a lot that is multi-use medium or something to that effect, and they're going to want to know what can go over there. And if it's, well, it could be option 1, could be 2, could be 3, could be 4.
No.
Well, I'm fine with 1 and 2, but 3 and 4, no.
Right.
I continue to have those concerns. But we did take steps to kind of mitigate those concerns by, I think, having like a buffer or, within a certain distance, you could only have certain height of the building or whatever. But I continue to try to figure out how we balance this flexibility with helping people understand what is going on the lot next to them, so.
I struggle
Councilman,
with being able to dictate what design a property owner is going to be able to put up. I mean, everybody's got their own specific design, and one of them I think of is Walmart. I mean, made them jump through all kinds of hoops in order to build out at the Jordan Creek area. It's not their typical design. So isn't this going to impede development from a multitude of property owners?
I would say no. I mean, again, let me go back to the design.
He does bring up a good point. We have struggled with that, and we continue to struggle with
You mind
Topgolf
if I
and
jump in
others.
here?
National brands,
So when we talk
basically.
about building types, that isn't necessarily the same as the exterior design. You could have a mid-century modern or a classical building. They're all the same building type, but they have a different appearance.
Okay, but he talked about design, so that's where I
Right.
was,
And when we talk about design, we're talking about setting the character of a development or a street. And part of that is how all those puzzle pieces work together, and is a 5-story apartment building appropriate next to a 1-story single-family home? Those are those building types, 5-story apartment versus.
well, we already don't allow that. I mean, that's more of a zoning thing than a building type.
Right, but that's part of that piece to put together the context of each zoning district or place type. So we'll always have challenges with somebody coming in and saying, this is the way we do it. We have since I've been here. As staff goes through this process, this review process, what we try to do is say, okay, it's the city intent to do this. Show us how you can do it. I'm not going to tell you it has to be a certain style or a certain color. Show me how you're going to do that. That gives them the freedom to work with what they have for their only constraints, plus show us how they're going to meet this particular pattern.
So there's still always going to be one-offs on different situations.
Right.
We're going
We
to,
will always have that, and that's why it's really important to have that intent statement, to say, this is what we intend, show us how we can accomplish it.
but there's no teeth to make anybody do it.
Well, as far as a zoning ordinance, we're explaining why we're doing something, and then we've given them this palette of streets, building types, all these different elements, and we have those things that they can work with and say, okay, that one-off may not fit these types we've established, but this is what we're intending to do. Show us how that one-off will achieve this. We talked about that when we limited building sizes.
But as soon as you allow that one-off, now you got another one-off, and another one-off, and a 12th one-off, because, well, you let him do it, and you let them do it, and you let them,
Well,
why
we
can't
didn't
I
let
do
them
it?
do it. They showed us how they met the intent.
All right, Renee.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I know, again, we're going to continue to talk about it. And as I process this, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Is this moving toward more standardization, less creativity? I'm just trying to, because I know that the comp plan was built on this whole concept of flexibility, kind of. I remember even the mayor, past mayor was just really bent on a lot of flexibility in various areas. I know zoning is more myopic and it's a drill down.
Right.
But I'm kind of feeling, and I might not be appropriate, but it feels like there's like standardization. You want to come here, these are three options. You decide what's going to make work. Is that the feel of the city that we want to embrace? Because
Well, and I'll
there's
speak for
buildings like
myself.
Dave
I-
and Buster's,
yeah.
and I know Councilman
Yeah,
McKinney built
no.
that. Look at that building that's so incredibly different and unique. And
I
so.
would say that's certainly not been our intent as we walk through this, and
Okay,
the end goal is to get something that is not standardization.
okay.
But when we talked about giving you assurances,
Of-
but setting those expectations so somebody who is next door understands what's happening, that's where we've got that trade-off of, okay, this is our intent. The flexibility comes in, how are you going to accomplish that intent? So it's really providing more variety, more options for people coming into the city to develop.
It's
It's
not going to
providing
be the cookie
more,
cutter.
it's providing more options
Correct. You know,
Oh, okay.
how, one of the things. we
within
talk-
certain standards.
And what we're focusing on is community character rather than the use.
Okay,
And so
Community character.
that's where that flexibility is coming. We're certainly not going to make it more difficult.
okay,
It's something where when you have
yeah,
options,
yeah,
I say, I have this intent.
Okay.
Somebody's going to say, well, what does that look like on paper? Tell me what that intent looks like on paper. We can say, okay, these are some of the aspects that we believe sets that character.
okay,
So it gives them kind of that puzzle piece or the starting point.
okay.
I would say
The
that
puzzle piece.
we should remember one of the reasons West Des Moines is such an outstanding city is we do have standards. I mean, it kind of scares me to hear some of this discussion because when I was in Altoona, Casey's come and built a metal Casey's for us. When I was city administrator, I go, wait a second. In Clive, they got brick ones. So we set a better standard. It's higher tax valuation. It's more desirable community to be in. We have it helps a lot of those elements. So when you say we don't want any expectations or standards, just do whatever you want. That's Houston, Texas. You could go there and see what that looks like.
That's not what I was saying, but.
But no, but I
understand.
get the
You're listening to
vibe.
the tone. You're
Yeah,
listening
getting
to
the vibe that we don't want.
Do we want, yeah.
It's not, I don't think it's
I think we
having
want something in the
standards.
middle.
I think the worry is cookie cutter. Okay, so what are you looking to do? You're looking to come into this area that you can do this, or this, but you want to do option two, which is commercial building. Well, our commercial buildings look like this. You know, I think and it's not that. This is not that. You're still going to have design standards and guidelines. Someone's going to be able to submit the building. Here's what I'm having it look like. It may have some minimum standards and things that we want to see. I want to see a certain amount of brick in this area, a certain amount of stone, some minimum standards that they have to meet, but it's not, the worry is having cookie cutter. Anytime you have a commercial building, it's going to look like this one. Anytime you're going to have an apartment building, it's going to look like this. That's not what this is.
Yeah, and I'd just point to the two bullet points that are up under community design, because that's more of our approach. We're obviously going to reflect what we hear from the process to get the fit that's right for you, but our approach is to shift things more towards scale, format, and patterns. Those are things, those are big design elements, but they're also very objective and measurable. And so those are the things that kind of determine how a project conceptually appears and fits into its surroundings. It doesn't have anything to do with the aesthetic and style elements, which are important in West Des Moines, but those are the ones where there will be a lot more flexibility. Those are where we expect the more intent-based standards. And so that goes back to a slide Graham showed early on, is we want to be shifting your code to something like this. So the red is the standard. Those are the things, that's our starting point. And that might be where all of the scale, format, and design standards are addressed, and you are doing those things, and there's not a lot of flexibility on those. But when you start to get into some of the aesthetic or stylistic things, we would expect to have some flexibility so that it's not a cookie cutter result. We're not dictating style, but we are dictating how things need to appear and come to meet your standards. So we're not there yet, but we understand where you want to be, and we'll work to get there.
So it's more, again, I'm just going to use 2 examples, that's all I can think of. And maybe this isn't even right, doesn't go together. But in this, you can do 1 or 2. In this area, this comp planned area, you can either do commercial or you can do multifamily residential. If you do commercial, then the building can be, the footprint can be this size. It can be this many story. But it's not specifying the building has to look like this design. It may have, minimum, we'd like to see this much brick, this much stone.
Right.
Now, go, design your building, bring it in. It's more in general, what the general building type will be, or different building types that can be within that commercial building.
Yes, right. I think it's more general. And again, if I go back to a lot of that's going to be dictated, not all zoning districts will be the same. Like, so we won't just go from your comp plan to that's going to dictate that you have all these options. They have to have a zoning district that supports those, and that's what we're figuring out. So some will support a lot of options, others won't support as many. There'll be differences.
Yeah, I think this is just so abstract that when we see the next time, we're going to have a lot more meetings. Not that I'm trying to get us a lot more meetings, but we're going to have, this is really important. Yeah, we're going to have more meetings to understand this, and we're going to have pictures of what, like you guys had some of that in the slides, what we're talking about, what the different building types look like that can go on here for commercial, what the street type's going to be, the better, more pictures, more visual, the better you're going to be. So.
And we'll do that, and then another key piece for us is reminding, because like Graham's point of the standards won't be perfect. We haven't written a perfect zoning ordinance yet, but it'll be better than your current one.
Yep.
It'll be better than your current one. We're pretty confident of that. But joking aside, reminding where we're coming from your current standards is an important baseline to know whether there's areas where we don't want to change very much from our current baseline to the areas that we do want to change from our current baseline completely, because what we've been doing hasn't been working. So that'll be another piece of this when you see the code of what's changing from what we're doing now.
So I think we've said this, but an example of bring in an example of projects we've had and carry them through what is now versus what will be would be really helpful to say, okay, how would this vary now if I come in with this project here in the future, or pick a spot where you're going to go so that we could see. I'm like everybody else up here. It's hard to really get my mind wrapped around some of this, but.
Yeah, and we've started to do some of that as well. So a good way to think of that is a larger PUD that you've done in the past. We probably won't get it. It won't all be in one district, but we would be, hey, if this project came in with a combination of R2, C3, and mixed use 1, that's all they would need. They wouldn't need this large development plan. They could have done this in 3 base zoning districts. That's kind of what we're shooting for.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. You guys have anything else, or? Well, I really appreciate the first blush of this. As you can tell from the questions, our heads are spinning. We're trying to make sense of it all and trying to put it in a form that we can see, so look forward to the next time we get together and discuss this.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.